As people across Canada struggle to find an apartment that won't drain their bank account, condos and luxury units sit empty. In Vancouver, Mark Carney and BC Premier David Eby are proposing to purchase some of these vacant units to transform them into affordable rent-to-own housing, with Pierre Poilievre calling it a bailout for condo owners. Financial details of the sale are not public yet, so it's unclear if they'd get a discounted price or pay above market rate so condo owners can recoup their investments. Meanwhile, in Montreal, affordable housing's vacancy rate sits at 1.5%, but vacancy rates for more expensive units are much higher. Mayor Soraya Martinez-Ferrada told CBC Daybreak that the city needs to increase affordable housing supply without touching the prices of the units that are already on the market.
Isn't it frustrating, though, that it feels like perhaps some landlords are not responding to the market? The market's saying that the rents should be lower, but they're holding them up, and they're not doing what the market dictates they should be doing. Is there anything you can do to kind of motivate them to perhaps put these rents lower so that people actually can get into them?
Well, unfortunately, as a mayor, I don't have the means to force the private market, right? But what I can do is making sure that we partner with the private sector and seeing how can we make sure that these apartments are lower in terms of rent and we can put them on the market.
After 2 unhoused people died within 24 hours back in March, Martinez-Ferrada said that she felt powerless facing the homelessness crisis. The city has also announced interest-free rental loans for tenants, effectively subsidizing landlords' profits as rents continue to climb. Montreal is also spending $500,000 to repair 45 supported housing units for occupancy by September to try to get people off the streets. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to the estimated 5,000 unhoused folks in the city. Experts told Montreal Gazette that the CAQ's housing law reforms during their second term benefited landlords over tenants. While all this seems disheartening for those of us who don't own our own homes, a growing majority in Montreal, some citizens are taking the housing crisis into their own hands. In Toronto, York South-Weston Tenant Union and Climate Justice TO joined to form a citywide tenant union back in April. This comes after a series of rent strikes that led to, quote, amicable settlements between landlords and tenants. Toronto tenants were withholding rent due to neglected repairs and excessive rent hikes. Here in Montreal, the Montreal Autonomous Tenants Union, or SLAM, has been holding neglectful and abusive landlords accountable. Cléo Clamen, a member of SLAM, tells me about the successes of direct action that she's witnessed. Well, thank you so much, Cléo, for being on the show. To start off, I'd love to hear about the work that SLAM does, who's a part of it, what the sort of ethos is.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So SLAM is just a union of tenants. We're all volunteers. We don't have any external funding. And our ethos is kind of working together to create better living conditions for tenants outside of the state. So that can mean direct action. That can mean organizing our buildings, showing up for each other, and kind of just recognizing that the current housing system of landlordism, of extracting money from tenants for the fundamental need of housing is not something that works, and it's not something that's acceptable, and it's not something that we believe should exist.
And how long have you been working with SLAM? Like, what prompted you to get involved?
So I've been a member of SLAM for, I think, a bit over a year. I was having my own issues with the landlord when I first moved to Montreal. And then over the past 6 months or so, I've gotten a lot more involved now that I've had support from other tenants with navigating my own case and getting that dealt with. I've been kind of doing the same for other people, showing up to help other people with their landlord issues, with their cases, with their buildings. And that's kind of what SLAM is all about. It almost just feels like a giant group of friends. Like, I've made so many friends and found so much community in the union because it's kind of just a bunch of neighbors in different neighborhoods, and we're all just regular people who organize together. And yeah, it's a really, really lovely group of people. It's probably like one of the most, as much as the work that we do can be very exhausting, and as much as like organizing around housing can be very draining sometimes, as much as sometimes there's very perfect stories, it can be very heartwarming to win better material conditions for each other and to help people just very much materially improve their lives by fighting back against landlords.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about some of those wins, some of those successes, what kinds of impacts you've seen from like the work that SLAM does.
Absolutely. So a good friend of mine was in the union last summer. Her and her partner got a 19.8% annual rent increase.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So, and the landlord had been trying to get rid of all of his tenants and turn all of the units into Airbnbs.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe in that building, her and her partner, they are the only unit that's not an Airbnb now.
Wow.
And they'd already gotten, I think, around 10%. I don't remember the exact number, but she said something. I think it was a low double-digit number, like 10% the year before. So, like, they could not afford this rent increase.
Mm-hmm.
And 19.8%, I don't think most people could afford 19.8%.
Yeah.
How most people are doing right now. But we organized around that, and her landlord's business was down the block, and we organized a picket line against her landlord's business. And people stood outside his coffee shop with banners and with flyers saying, this is who owns this business, this is what he does to his tenants. And they went back to the negotiating table, nothing much happened. So they said, okay, we're going to have a second picket. And the day before the second picket, he sits back down, he says, okay, we're going to give you a 0% rent increase, but you take on the hydro. And she was like, yeah, taking on the hydro one is, I think it's only a few percent of the rent. Like, it wasn't very much, but also it means that next year, this year, when they're doing another percentage-based increase, the hydro doesn't factor into that. So all of the subsequent rent increases are going to be smaller in terms of dollar amount. So this was a huge win. We went from 19.8% to 0%. There's another, in 2022, there was a building owned by this corporate landlord called Cogier downtown. And there were about 100 tenants in that building. And there was mold, there was all sorts of issues with disrepair. One tenant alleged to us that he had a leaking pipe explode on him because of improper heating, and then Cogier billed him for the damages.
Wow.
And yeah, so it was pretty bad. And a bunch of Cogier tenants formed kind of like a tenants council in their building, and then they reached out to some SLAM allies. And I obviously wasn't a member at the time, this was many years ago, but SLAM showed up and they went to the landlord's office and they disrupted it for 30 minutes. And the next day, Cogier reached an agreement with us and with the tenants where they agreed to complete the repairs. There was a tenant who wanted out of their lease. They got out of their lease. And they compensated all of those tenants for the repairs that had gone undone for so long. There's also things like I heard a story about a building in Mile End where the landlord tried to illegally evict the whole building. SLAM did one picket line at their office, and all of those evictions got stopped. There's all sorts of stories where evictions are delayed or ideally prevented. There's all sorts of stories where people can fight back against rent increases through direct action, and they can get, like, they've gotten, like, sometimes even 0% the next year, or, and significantly reduce the year before, because oftentimes, like, a landlord might give a rent increase, and then they'll see how organized that tenant is, and they'll see their involvement in SLAM, and they'll figure it's not even worth the trouble of trying to extract more money from that tenant the next year because of how much the union is able to fight back. And I think that's kind of the magic of it, is that one tenant against even just a small landlord, especially a corporate landlord, it's like, it doesn't feel like you have a lot of power. It feels very hopeless, and there's a lot of learned helplessness that tenants sometimes fall into. But if you're in a union with dozens or hundreds of other tenants, and you guys are all supporting each other and fighting back, then it's like a landlord might try to evict you, and 50 of your friends show up, and the landlord is like, I'm not bothering with this anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot to take on. And there's the tenants union, and then also like tenants councils can form as well, like for individual buildings, or is that how it kind of works?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay,
so
cool.
One building that I was door knocking for recently in Milton Park, they're in the process of forming a tenants council because their building got sold to a corporate landlord who's like not answering emails, not answering the phones, trying to get all of the tenants to agree to like pre-authorized account withdrawals. generally being very sketchy. And this landlord, it's actually, I think, owned technically by like a shell company.
Right.
But the landlord has a history of buying up buildings, kicking everyone out, and jacking up the rents. And it's a lot of elderly residents who live there, many of whom are not fluent in English or French in that neighborhood, because it's a lot of like older immigrant communities. So it's very good that these communities are able to get organized and able to get, I guess, take that power back.
Yeah, totally. And in terms of direct action, what kinds of tactics do you see that are working really well?
I mean, I think the picket lines are really big, because the thing that landlords really care about often is their reputation and their bottom line, which is very affected by their reputation. If people see a picket line with a bunch of people protesting outside of a landlord office, that gets people's attention, that immediately can make people aware of what's going on. So I think the picket lines are a really big thing. Another thing that people often do is a banner drop. They'll like hang a banner from their balcony that says like, my landlord is doing this. That tenant who had the 19.8 rent increase, that's one of the tactics that she used, is they had this banner that they dropped from their balcony. And then that building's on Saint Denis. So everyone who walked past would see, oh, wow, that landlord is doing this. So it's kind of just
traffic.
Utilizing that reputation damage to, well, or rather the threat of damage to a landlord's reputation of, hey, if you're behaving like this, everyone's going to know you're behaving like this.
Yeah, the name and shame. Well, also, I think I saw on social media that when there was the picket in front of the landlord's coffee shop, then it really hit the sales. Like, people weren't going in to buy coffee. So it also, in certain cases, can hit their bottom line.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Slam has had these successes. Meanwhile, the mayor is going, oh, I feel like powerless facing the homelessness crisis. I can't, I don't have the power to control the private market, blah, blah, blah. And in theory, there's these regulations against, rent evictions and illegal Airbnbs and abusive rent increases or billing tenants for damages the landlord is supposed to pay for. But like in practice, it seems like those regulations don't do much. So do you think that there's anything kind of at the policy level that could improve this in tandem with direct action? Or are you kind of like feeling disenchanted with the idea that policy could help?
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna take that question step by step. So
yeah, I
in
sort
terms
of lumped a few things together there. Do you want me to take it back, actually?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
In terms of Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, I mean, we know exactly why she can't do anything, which, I mean, Chris did some very good reporting for you guys about her campaign finance, and a big donor was the real estate lobby. And then CBC, or maybe it was Radio-Canada, did some reporting on the fact that she's a landlord herself, that she had charged an illegal security deposit and illegal fees. The reason that she's not willing to do anything about the housing crisis is not because she can't, it's because she doesn't want to and her donors don't want her to. She is profiting off of the so-called housing crisis. She is profiting off of the fact that housing is unaffordable, and so are the people who are funding her party. So she has every incentive to pretend that she can't do this and just try her best to hope it doesn't hurt her re-election chances, because she is materially profiting off of what's going on, and so are her donors. In terms of policymaking, I think generally the framing of the housing crisis, our view at SLAM, and my personal view as well, is that it's not really a housing crisis. It's the system of for-profit rent working exactly as intended, where landlords exist to try to extract as much capital as possible from tenants and to leverage the fact that paying rent is not the same as, I don't know, buying a television or a luxury good. You can't just say, oh, no, I don't need that. You can't just say, oh, I don't need housing.
Yeah, it's an inelastic good. Like
it's a fundamental human right.
Or an elastic good, I guess, yeah.
It's a fundamental human right, and landlords will exploit that because, and they will try to extract as much money as possible. And then you see the fact that so many people are outside on the streets, the fact that so many people can't afford housing, the fact that so many people are living paycheck to paycheck or even going into debt just to pay their rent. It is the system working as the state and as the ruling class intends. And because of that, I think that legislation can help a little bit, but another union member put it really well to me is that legislation is crumbs, and we're not asking for crumbs. We're asking for a system where housing is not treated as a commodity. It is treated as what it should be, a basic human need that everyone gets.
Yeah, so that vision would kind of lend itself to co-ops or truly social housing.
Exactly. To co-ops and to, beyond that, expropriating housing. We see all sorts of abandoned buildings around the city. We see here, and especially in other cities like Toronto, all of these new developments where it's luxury condos that just sit empty.
Yeah.
I remember in Toronto when I was a teenager, I came across this giant, like $20 million mansion in the Bridle Path, which is a very bougie area of Toronto that was just sitting there empty. And that plot of land was big enough it could have housed hundreds of people, although it was in a bougie area. So the neighbors, it was like across the street from Drake's house. The neighbors never really about that. But yeah, there's all sorts of cases like that here. There's all sorts of buildings along St. Catherine, in the Old Port, in Plateau, in all of these different neighborhoods that are just sitting empty that could be turned into public housing, that could be turned into housing. But our end goal is ultimately that housing is not something that people pay for. Our end goal is not like lower rents. Our end goal is the abolition of rent. Our end goal is that people should not be paying for something that they cannot just choose to live without. And yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the very core of what we're fighting for. I think a lot of other tenants unions have this idea that they just have to root out the bad apple landlord. It's kind of like the same people who think that the police can be reformed. In both cases, it's a broken system. You can't reform a broken system. It's not a bad apple. It's the entire bunch.
It's functioning as it was designed
exactly
to function.
I'd say the other thing is if we look at things like, I believe it's Bill 31, the lease transfer bill, if we look at the CAC housing policy of the past 8 or so years, if we reverse all of that, if we repeal all of those bills, the damage has already been done. The cat's out of the bag. All of those, the lease transfer bill has meant that all of those low rents and all of those affordable leases are gone and they are not coming back. Yeah. And there's not really any amount of realistic legislation that is going to fix the current system beyond abolishing the current system. And that is our perspective. I think it's maybe an idea that a lot of people in the general public may not have heard before, but at the end of the day, that's our view, is that housing should be owned by the people who live in it, that housing is a human right, and that housing is not a commodity and it's not a profit vehicle.
So you've talked about, the sorry state of the legislation, but also on the flip side, the fact that as tenants, there is power there in organizing. How can everyday people, work together to combat the housing crisis?
I think a big thing is just knowing what you can do under the law. So you have the right to be an asshole to your landlord. You have the right to record your conversations with your landlord. As long as you're one of the parties in the conversation, you can record those conversations without consent from your landlord, because Canada has one-party consent laws.
Oh, I'm familiar as a journalist.
Yeah, exactly. And you can refuse your rent increase. You can take your landlord to the towel if they're refusing to fix major issues in your apartment or in your house. You can picket your landlord's office or your landlord's place of business. You can start a tenants council with your neighbors. You can join the tenants union, or if you live in a city where there's no tenants union, you can start a tenants union. And I think these are all things that people need to be doing. I think that sitting around and hoping for politicians that have a vested interest in this system. I mean, the stat I believe the last time I checked is that 41% of federal MPs are landlords. And you can sit around waiting for those people to create better conditions for tenants, but it's not going to happen. Our mayor is a landlord. Our MPs, a huge portion of our MPs are landlords. Many of our MNAs are landlords. And this is a system that for decades has produced worse housing conditions, and people need to take matters into our own hands and realize that we are a lot stronger when we band together and when we unionize together than when we just sit around and feel helpless and don't take action.
I do have one more question that I just thought of. What would you say to people who advocate for like sitting down and negotiating with your landlord and having a good relationship with your landlord? What do you think about that?
I think at the end of the day, it's like you're trying to compromise with someone whose entire role is getting as much money out of you as possible and exploiting your need for housing and your basic human needs for being housed, for having a roof over your head, in order to extract money from you, in order to extract the money that you have, the money that you are working for. And you can't really compromise with that. You can't really, it's just something that's so unethical that shouldn't exist. And I think that playing nice with your landlord means giving in, means allowing someone to exploit you.
It's not a level playing field. One person is negotiating for their housing, the other one is negotiating for money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Money that they generally do not need if they can afford to own buildings.
Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I think, again, I would just really encourage people who are listening, who are having issues with their landlord, who maybe get a rent increase and it's even 1 or 2% above or even at what the TAL is suggesting, refuse your rent increase. Organize with your neighbors. If you have that leaky pipe that your landlord is refusing to fix, or that broken door or mold, talk to your local logement committee, talk to your local housing justice organization, and talk to your neighbors and either find a tenants union or start one if there isn't one, and start organizing against your landlord, because we don't get better conditions by sitting around and hoping for them. We get better conditions by fighting for them.
For people who are interested, where can they find more information about the Montreal Autonomous Tenants Union?
So it's slam-matu.org. That's slam-matu.org, or slam.matu on Instagram. I believe there's also a Facebook and I think a Mastodon. And you can go on there. You can send us an email. You can just come and learn more and show up to our open hours, show up to a meeting, and come talk housing with people, come learn how you can organize against your landlord. We also do workshops and all sorts of events. It's the summer, so there's probably going to be some barbecues coming up. A lot of our neighborhood branches are going to have, I know that Verdun branch is having one later this month, and I think Mile End is going to be in August or September. But yeah, it's a really good place to come meet other people in your neighborhood and start organizing together for better housing conditions.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.